Welcome to Kentucky Horsepower, the official podcast of the Kentucky Automobile Dealers Association. Good day, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Kentucky Horsepower, the official podcast of the Kentucky Auto Dealers Association. And I'm very pleased to have joining me today Kevin Tynan, Senior Automotive Analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. Those of you that have been coming to our convention the last couple of years have seen Kevin, and as he shares all his insight and wisdom on things going on within the industry. And you've also heard him here on this podcast. And as I remember it now, I think it was a couple years ago, you attended all of our district meetings virtually. You and I did one of these that we shared with our members there. So Kevin, great seeing you again.
Thanks for having me.
So, lots going on. Where to begin? Let's start with UAW. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about what's happening now as we are recording this today. This is, I believe, we're on day 9 of this event. Let's start with just your general thoughts, Kevin, on where this stands, where it could go, and how you see this potentially playing out.
Yeah, so from what we hear, the sides are reasonably far apart still at this point. And I think what you'll get in very short order is the UAW going after some of the more important factories, specifically, SUVs, pickup trucks, and this bleeds through the entire supply chain. You have supplier shops that are not only dealing with the domestic manufacturers, but if you look at states like Ohio, you have Honda presence there that's not UAW, but their suppliers are. And, we've already heard from Mercedes about having issues with supply chain and getting parts, so this is not just an issue for the domestic manufacturers. It really is for, North America as a whole in terms of output. Sure. But when I look at it this way, in terms of the negotiations, right, I'm looking at what I think each side wants and needs in these discussions. And it's very easy for the UAW or anybody to look at the manufacturers and see how profitable they've been, certainly during the last contract, but even going back 10 years. And we've talked about this a million times, where mix shift in the US really started to go to truck and away from car. Right. It started in about 2013. And if you look at that period, it's, for a company like Ford, that's 90 billion in earnings. For GM, it's 124 billion in earnings. And the union's basically saying, like, hey, we contributed to that profitability and we want our share. And, at least from my perspective, the automakers can't hide that, right? You can't say, oh, well, but. So the other side of that, however, though, is the manufacturers, I think, are going to say, we'll pay up. We have to increase the hourly wage significantly. Maybe the ratification bonus is big. But what they'll also point to, is to say, we've grown earnings over that period dramatically, but we've done it with less volume, right? We've done it with less inventory. Right. We've done it with less output. We need that flexibility to adjust capacity and headcount going forward. We can't necessarily be married to, a jobs level or a capacity output level because we think, I think, and I'm sure the automakers think, that this is going to be a smaller market. We've talked about this all summer. Sure. This is going to be a smaller market at higher transaction prices. So I think what you'll get from the perspective of the manufacturers is, okay, I think whatever the UAW's number is, maybe it's 36% still today. I think there's a better chance that manufacturers come closer to that, but then on the back end say, but, if we need to take out a plant or we need to adjust to a smaller market, we have to have the flexibility to do that. The other point is, some of the other benefits we hear the union talking about or asking for or demanding is, sort of the old school pension benefits, healthcare kind of thing. And I think that's another one that's very easy for the other side to point to and say, remember when we went bankrupt? This was a big part of that, right? So I think the union can see the profitability and say, we want that share. The manufacturers can point to the reduction in output and say, we can't promise that. And then they can point to bankruptcy and say, when we had that structure, this is how it turned out. So I kind of feel like it's going to be, when an agreement gets reached, it's going to be a big number for the union in terms of hourly wage, but it's going to be that flexibility and none of those legacy costs that hurt so much prior to the global financial crisis and the bankruptcy period of 2009.
Yeah, look, there's a lot to unpack there, but a couple of things right off the bat, as you mentioned, relating to proper inventory levels not being tied to the job thing. It seems like over the last, and COVID in a way was a big factor on this, but inventory levels, again, we remember what they were years ago when there was just inventory, and incentive after incentive to move inventory. And now you went from that to then, of course, not having any, and then finding that sweet spot, right, of where there is a quick turn. So dealers and manufacturers have quick ROI, all those sort of things. So when you put it in that perspective, as it relates to the UAW, that is a really big piece and of this, and packaging this all together, as well as these legacy costs that you mentioned and whatnot. So all of that being said, and again, things can change at any moment, but it seems like this could be this could go on potentially for a while with all those things that you just covered.
Yeah, and look, when we talk about, and you can, it kind of drives me crazy every 4 years when this happens, but
right.
Because everybody wants to know what's the impact, what's the, how,
right.
And it's just like, well, I can make up numbers with the best of them, but there's a lot of moving parts to this.
Right.
But I did make up some numbers, and if you look at it, and I said, okay, let's say they get the UAW gets an increase 8% a year, and it ends up being 36% over 4 years.
Right.
And what does that mean to cost of goods? And the impact there wasn't significant, in terms of, I don't know, it's another $500 per vehicle in the cost of goods. And when you look at it, that mix shift for the past 10 years has been $10,000, right? Not only in content, but in mix shift to truck from car. So the idea is that I think that it would be painful, but it would be absorbable to be, to say, okay, we have our cost of goods is going up, but you can cover that with higher transaction prices. The problem there, I think, though, is you have companies like, let's say, Ford, who is retail revenue in the US is 99% truck. For General Motors is low 90s. The Stellantis brands are low 90s. So the issue is, well, we've been doing this for 10 years, and we're kind of at the end of the runway here, right? So how do we charge more or expand margins on the same things on this process that we've been going through for the past 10 years? And I think what the market expects or expected and is to say, like, oh, well, it's electrification, right? We do more of that, less of this. Right. Transaction prices and profitability goes up, and there's your transition. Problem is that it's not as profitable. It's in fact not profitable for a lot of the automakers, if not all of them. And so that's been a very, very messy switch or transition from one to the other. When automakers decided to go truck versus car in 2013, day one, that's profitable.
Right.
This transition is not day one profitable, but I'll tell you what is, and what we've been kind of talking about is software, right? And whether that's advanced driver assist systems, whether it's connectivity, whether it's efficiency, or whatever it is, that's a day one profitable. And I think that's going to be the bridge here, is to say, if you're a company like Ford, Mustang Mach-E is down to $56,000, which is not a profitable level for you.
Right.
But, Ford Blue Cruise was, by Consumer Reports, ranked the top, ADAS system. Well, now you're starting to see commercials for that, right? Now, if we can upsell there, we can kind of keep this very, very heavy truck mix, internal combustion based, but now we can add revenue and profit contribution by doing more software and services that way. And I think that's going to be the bridge that gets to the if electrification profitability turns to the positive.
Yeah, look, you make a really good point. I'm going to use this as a bridge to kind of get to the
how I did that.
Yeah, that was smooth. See, this isn't our first time doing this. We've done this before. But as it relates to EV, first, prior to the strike, UAW had spoken out against the Biden administration's proposal to convert a number of these plants to be able to produce more EVs and whatnot, which was sort of an interesting dynamic between the administration and the UAW just on the eve of this strike. But I wanted to speak to that aspect of things with the overarching sort of theme being the issue with EVs right now, and it's not profitable. And here in Kentucky, for example, we have a $5.8 billion battery plant by Ford being created as we speak. So I know I just threw a lot of things out there, but let's talk a little bit about some of that stuff, starting with the UAW's perspective on converting these plants. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, when you roll it back and you look at materials and the cost of those materials and where those materials are processed, and when and I like to think about it, shovel in the ground to disposal of the battery, right? The entire process. I think a lot of what you hear in media or whoever talks about it, it's really like tailpipe versus no tailpipe. This must be better.
Right.
And it's not that simple, so as you think about the more materials means more costs, right? Every time somebody touches something, they get paid for it, right? So the idea that, now that's okay in terms of increasing revenue, right? So you say like, oh, okay, well, we charge more for those things. The problem is that they cost more to mine, to process, to assemble. So just natural business economics 101, even if you could and you can charge more for an electric vehicle because it costs more, that means you're going to sell fewer of them, right? And that's the dynamic we've seen in the truck versus car mix, is that, yes, we can sell more trucks and fewer cars, and we can watch average transaction price go to $50,000 in this country, but you're going to sell fewer of them, right? And that's just how it works, right? So prices go up, demand goes down, right? Your margins may expand, your contribution may be better, but you're just going to sell fewer of them. So that's the issue there with a transition to electrification. And that goes back to my point, is that, it's very easy for the manufacturers to go like, hey, this is what these are going to cost. We're going to make and sell fewer of them, right? We can't promise you headcount. We can't promise you how many factories or what our target output is going to be every year, because we need to sell more expensive things. Now, the media and, I guess some of the parts of the market will think that every sale is a good sale, right? Oh, they'll be $35,000 or $25,000 EVs, just like there's $25,000 internal combustion. And I'm saying, man, I'm not holding my breath for that. And that's not to say that they won't exist. I don't think they'll exist profitably, right? So now when you throw that dynamic into and you go, okay, so if I'm an automaker, yeah, I could sell. Look, Nissan Leaf is a $35,000 EV. They sell 12,000 a year. Why? Because it loses money, right? So if there were this magic price point, yeah, it may, lower may mean more demand, but you don't have profit parity with the other things you're selling. So that makes that a bad sale.
Right.
And I think that's what the manufacturers, and that's where, the union is kind of stuck here, is to say, there's just going to be fewer things made, right? And what the labor rate is a different issue. It's just, okay, so even if we pay the battery factory workers or the assembly line workers to assemble EVs, there's probably, arguably, there's less, man hours,
right,
because of the simplicity of it. And I don't, I'm not sure that I believe all that either. If it's 25 hours to build a vehicle, is it significantly less to build an EV? I would tend to think no, but I haven't really done science on that yet. So, so the idea is like, okay, so even if we pay you the same amount to assemble that vehicle that also takes 25 hours, they're going to be more expensive because there's more inputs to it.
right.
And if they're more expensive, that means we're going to make fewer of them, which means we don't need as many people, right? We don't need this line running. So it's a very messy time in terms of that transition,
Right.
from one thing. And look, because then everybody says to me, oh, well, it has to happen, right? Because there's so much money has been invested in this transition, building battery plants and all these things. And I'm going, well, think about all the money that was invested in General Motors and Chrysler, and they ended up bankrupt, right? So that just means that sometimes the wrong decisions are made, right? Or the conditions or the environment force you into decisions that are costly.
Yeah. Well, and the challenge here too, look, and I've said this and had these conversations with others, in that the evolution of our industry to date, all as models evolve and buying habits change, and all those things have been driven by the consumer. And now we have a situation that's, as it relates to EVs, this is not consumer driven, it's government driven. And part of how we've gotten here, it feels like, again, the mindset is you throw enough money at something, it's just going to happen because of all the money that's been put into it. Meanwhile, you have EVs. I think the average price is around $66,000 or so an EV, and states
falling.
Yeah. And whereas states like mine, the median household income is about $52,000, $53,000. So you have this pricing disparity that you mentioned earlier regarding the cost versus ICE. Then you have the infrastructure piece, that, again, if you're the Commonwealth of Kentucky versus, say, even my old state of Virginia, which is much further along in their infrastructure, to the CARB states in general, then you get into the cold climates versus the warmer climates as it relates to range anxiety. It seems that we've gotten to a place. I guess my question is, how did we get here? Like, if we unfold all this stuff now, how did we get to the point? Normally there are studies and all kinds of things done before you make some sort of change or a pivot within any company. And it seems almost overnight we just got here and said, we're doing EV.
Yeah, well, and look, and the only point I would make is, the past 10 years that we talked about, the transition to truck from car was manufacturer driven, right? That was, our cost structure is such that we need to charge and make more money on the things we build because until we can rationalize these costs, this is the only way we survive. And they ultimately didn't previously, but this was the strategy, was to say, we got to sell stuff that costs more, that costs more money.
Yeah.
So that was the manufacturer saying, you buy this because this is what we need for you to buy, right? And there's a lot of ways to do that, right? You make really good trucks, you make really bad cars, right? You market how rugged and how much utility there is into these more expensive.
Right. You can have a truck or you can have a Mustang, right?
Right. Yeah. Right. So then you control the choice. And so that's been the past 10 years. Now, to your point, and you're exactly right, is that this transition, which is supposed to be so seamless to internal combustion and people would argue, it's not supposed to be seamless, it's disruption. But arguably but again, the transition to truck from car was profitable on day one and was seamless.
Right.
because it was the manufacturers deciding that's the way they needed to go.
Right.
But this one, like you said, if this is government, and look, I don't know. I still don't believe it's so government driven. I think it's government following media, right? Which is,
okay.
Look, I think if you have a crazy billionaire who tweets some stuff and then the media is like, that's the guy that we should all listen to. And then the government wants to do what the media thinks is the best thing, and look good. And then you get the companies, then you get the markets go like, hey, interest rates are 0%. We need some return somewhere. Let's invest in this stuff. And then money chases that. And then it's like, well, look at that valuation of that thing. And then the other automakers go like, how do we get that valuation? Well, let's say similar things and do similar things. And, so this is how we wind up here, which is, as you were going through all your points, I'm thinking the word is half baked in terms of an idea, right? Like there's benefit, but look, the one thing I always say is like, I think we're past the point, like, let's not call this climate anymore, right? Like, this is not climate. This is capitalism. This is, we need you to buy stuff that's more expensive because the net benefit, to the climate is a very, very, very long runway, very long, if it's provable at all, right? And that's a whole other ocean that I get into, which is, well, science shows this. I say, well, your science shows that, and I can find science that proves the exact opposite. So your science in your mind is always right, and the other side's science on the other side is always right, and we're never going to agree that what the right thing is, So it's a mess, right? Like it's really, we've gotten to a point where we don't even know that this is better.
No, and that's right. And for all the as it relates to the materials and all that's needed. And oh, by the way, who controls the vast majority of these materials? Well, it's our good friends in China. And a number of us went to DC here recently, the annual NADA Washington conference, where we meet with our delegation. And that's a concern that came up amongst some of the legislators in our delegation that we spoke with. The other interesting point was, the question was simply asked, well, why not just do hybrid? Why not do a plug? Doesn't that make the most sense?
I feel that momentum coming.
Yeah,
I really do. I've been getting asked that question more and more and more. I think Lexus has a commercial out, on plug-in hybrid, and it does make a ton of sense. The way people or purists, EV purists, will poo-poo it is to say, well, now you're carrying around a heavy internal combustion engine, when you're on the battery, and when you're on internal combustion, you're carrying around this heavy battery. And, why would an automaker invest in both technologies? And I'm saying, why does it have to be two technologies? Why isn't it one technology with two versions of propelling the vehicle? Right. So I agree. I mean, and I have a lot of people, anecdotally who say, Pacifica, Chrysler Pacifica, like, I need a minivan and it plugs in and I get, 85 miles per gallon because I run the kids to, around, and I'm on electric all the time. And then when we want a road trip, there we go. And we're all set, and we don't have to have two vehicles for that. Cause that's usually my question. People be like, oh, I just bought an EV. I bought a Tesla. I say, what else do you have? And they go, oh, well, we have an SUV because
we have an SUV. So the long trip. Right. So
we got to take a long trip. Right?
Absolutely.
So, but I think that momentum, and look, and I said this, I've been saying this for years, right? Like, remember, Toyota is either very smart or very dumb. And turns out that they were the ones from the beginning that were like, we're not totally committed to that. We think there's steps along the way. And now I think the market and the consumer is starting to come around and say, like, wait, what's wrong with 85 mile per gallon equivalent?
Right.
Or 60 or whatever it winds up being, and I think, that's the thing that we've been missing in this idea that electrification is the singularity that solves the problem.
Right.
And not only does it solve the problem, but it solves the problem for everybody. Well, it doesn't, right?
No, no.
And so you can argue that the singularity of internal combustion doesn't solve the problem for everybody. And you say, okay, but then at the other end of the spectrum, neither does electrification. So there's probably something in the middle that, you know, pick a bucket, right? Do you want this? Do you want that? Do you want the other thing? And it's okay, whichever one you want to be able to do. And I think we're starting to swing in that direction a little bit, which is there are steps along the way. There are alternatives that were shouted down probably by a crazy billionaire at some point that you know, that or you know, the EV purists that say like, oh, that's a dumb idea, and it's not, right? Like, you know, we need options. It's why we don't only drive minivans. It's not why we don't only drive sports cars, right? There's people that have different needs in different places.
It's part of the qualifying process. When a consumer comes on a lot, that's the first thing you do is qualify. What are the wants? What are the needs? And it feels like collectively as an industry or as a country or from a leadership standpoint, to put it into most basic terms, we quit our job without having another one to go to. We put all right. We've just said this is where we're making it happen. Now it's like, oh gosh, how are we gonna make this all work? So I don't know. This will rage on. It will continue on. We'll continue to stay in touch with you, Kevin. I very much appreciate your time today. You always bring such great insights to our members here, and we'll look forward to talking to you as things progress.
Yeah, anytime. I always appreciate getting to speak with you, with the dealers. It's really the best part of the job. So anytime you need me, I'm here.
Perfect. Well, thanks again for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you next time on Kentucky Horsepower.